Good morning, everybody. Before Father Bob starts the presentation for today, I want to let anybody know, especially our people who are listening via recording, that the movie we've been showing is available on the Formed website that you can access through Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So here it is. It's called Paul Contending for the Faith. So even though you're not able to, we can't record that for you, you can go yourself and watch that. So thank you.
And who's the author? Stephen Ray. Yeah, the author is Stephen Ray. Isn't that interesting? I don't know if you know about this form program. It is a Catholic communication thing through parishes, and so we have signed up for it for years. But I don't know what the rigmarole is to do it. Do you have to get a card and sign up for it if you the form, or is it just there and you can just click onto
the website? If there's any questions, contact me.
Okay, great. Well, we're looking at session 17, I believe. Okay. Let me put this here. I'm sorry to be a little bit late, but I was helping some people upstairs with some things. So what has happened so far for our fall session was the events of the early church forming itself around Jerusalem. And that's where the apostles were. And so, you might have read in one of our daily readings or the weekly reading, Sunday reading, it said, and Paul, our Lord spoke to Paul, but then also spoke to several of the apostles, and then 500. And so there is a group of people that we don't know anything about because they came and went. We don't have any size of them, but anyway, our Lord spoke to them. That's the way the Acts of the Apostles goes. So, or I should say, that's one of Paul's letters to the Corinthians. So today, we move from that moment of the early church where we established Jerusalem as a center, and we went into all the questions and things about that and the antagonisms that go with Paul. And one of the things of antagonism, excuse me, I have to have this is my doctor, and she insists that I take some medical attention. And so, thank you. That's about the biggest pill you've ever seen, isn't it? You're very kind. Let me just see if this will. Yes, it worked. My IQ just went up 1 point. So,
have another sip.
I need more. Did you say? Thank you. Thank you. When, tell me when to stop. You think one will be enough?
No.
Thank you. So, with all that in mind, one of the difficulties the Jewish people have is this. If you go to Isaiah, which is kind of like the linchpin of all the Old Testament readings, it is a fabulous book. And it's actually 3 books written over a 200-year period, not because Isaiah was 200 years old, but because of the fact he wrote the first part of it up to chapter 39, and that was the Isaiah of Israel. And so we don't know who the author of the second book goes from chapter 40 to 54, I should say, and we don't know who that is. And but we do know it is the comfort group. And the comfort group is this: Lord, comfort my people. And it's often sung at Christmas time or Easter time. Comfort my people, comfort them. And then the next part is goes up to chapter 66, from 55 to 66. And that is, so the first part is before the captivity, shape up, they don't. So then they go to captivity, book 2, and now they're starting to come, get the inkling that they can, it looks like they're going to be able to come home. And then the third part is kind of like heavenly. So so go to Isaiah, and in Isaiah he talks about how there's going to be a formation at the end of time for the Jewish people, and they're going to be on a holy mountain, and they're going to be close to God. It sounds like heaven, doesn't it? And so they say that this is kind of like a vision that they have, that the afterlife will be somehow all the peoples of the world will assemble on this holy mountain, Mount Zion. So when you think of it that way, you find out that the book of Isaiah is kind of like a model on how the Jewish people should live. So Paul is very much into that, but the Jewish people are looking at that, and it's talking about a savior. Of the famous Isaiah 7:14, the virgin shall conceive and bear a child, and you will call him Emmanuel. Actually, the original word in the Hebrew is not virgin, but is a young woman. And when they translate it into Greek, then it becomes a virgin. So that's because the theologians got hold of it. So you have all of these prophecies, but not once do they mention these prophecies in terms of Messiah. They just say these things are going to happen to God's people, but they don't focus on an individual person. In fact, what they do is they take, when Isaiah said, well, we're going to be saved and we're going to be made holy and all that, he's talking about the whole group of the Jewish people. So the mind of the author is this, that he's telling you prophecies about how glorious things are going to be, and it's going to be the people of God, not an individual. See, but now Christians, when we read all of these prophecies and we go back into them, we say those are exactly what Jesus is all about. I quoted this morning Daniel chapter 7, where he has the ancient of a God, the ancient of ancients, long white beard and stuff like that. He describes it in his book in chapter 7. Daniel does. He's a prophet of vision. And then he says, and the Son of Man comes to him. And the ancient one says to the Son of Man, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. He says, I give that to you, and you have dominion over everything, and you will be. So doesn't that sound pretty familiar? It's the closing of Matthew's gospel. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, Jesus says, and therefore I give it to you, the apostles, and go therefore and baptize people, teach them to observe everything I've told you, and remember, I'll be with you to the end of time. So that's how the Gospel of Matthew stops. So what you're getting with this is that the Jewish people have a feeling that there's something great, about God, and it's all wrapped up in the book of Isaiah. Now, why do I mention all that? Because the Christians are making Messiah out of the prophecies, which is legitimate. In other words, why would God give us a prophecy of a Messiah without, kind of preparing you for it? So anyway, the result of that is that the Jewish people at Jesus' time are not looking for, they are looking for the Messiah, but they're thinking about it in terms of warlord or something to rescue them. So what the Christians are doing, though, is they're saying that's Jesus. And then here's the clincher to their opposition to Jesus. He was crucified. How can you say that the Messiah, the person of God or the people of God, are going to be crucified? See, so that becomes a major stumbling block for them, because of the fact that, how can we be calling on God who is, dead on a cross in one of the most painful deaths you can experience? And so this is not fair. They should look at themselves, because they themselves went after the prophets. Like poor Jeremiah got killed by his people, and some of these other prophets did too. Wasn't good to be in the prophet business. I should know, we're in a nonprofit program here. So, well, I worked on that all night. Sorry, it didn't go over. So now what we're doing here then is seeing that the opposition of that, why they have the opposition, and that is because they have such deep belief. Some people, myself included, think that is why Judas betrayed Jesus was because he from the south, from the area right around Jerusalem, whereas the others are all from the north up in Galilee. And he is the one who says, I'm closer to the faith, and the faith is not Jesus. And so he does it out of his own kind of thing. There's even a book written on Judas by a rabbi, and in that book, what he does is he calls him a hero. In other words, he was the one who understood that Jesus was, I don't want to say a fake, that's a improper, is not the full, is not God. And so in doing that, he was proper with the Jewish faith, whereas Jesus was improper. Does that make sense? So Judas had a reason. In other words, it wasn't the Gospel of John says, yeah, he was into the money bank. Well, big deal. You know, there's that's kind of a chintzy approach to things. Sorry, Gospel of John. So let's take a look at what we're doing in chapter 17 now, because after all that introduction of the Jewish conflict and things like that, what we're doing is we're now we have crossed over into Europe. We have had the experience of Lydia. Did you read that little essay on Lydia that we had part there? You see there are 5 pages, you know, on Lydia. You think that, you know, that you know, she only gets two or three lines in the scriptures, but they can write a whole little booklet on her. Well, the same thing today we had in our daily mass. We had the mention of Molech, the god of killing children. So appropriate for our country to pay attention to. That you took your firstborn male child and you threw it into a giant furnace, and so that was a sacrifice to the gods. That would guarantee you have good crops and good farmland. So when that kind of thing takes place, you feel that you know that we're on the wrong track here with some of these things that are going on. So what we're doing now is we've left behind. The reason I mention that is because in looking up my definition of Molech, I found there are 2 whole books written on it. And one of them is, you know, the sacrifice of the Old Testament, the human sacrifice of the Old Testament is the underlying thing for these books that are a whole book written on, you know, this fellow. So, well, anyway, now what we're doing is we're going from Philippi down to the next town, Thessalonica. And the reason we're going there is because Paul got sort of chased out of Lydia's house and things like that. He only stayed there for a couple of weeks. But she has established the church there. So first thing, here are things we're going to read today. I'll just go down these by number. Number 1, Paul's preaching of the gospel in Thessalonica leads to a near riot. What do you think the reason might be for that? Well, we know the answers to a lot of these questions already, don't we? Why would they have a riot in the city when Paul is talking about Jesus being the Lord? Well, okay. Secondly, what parallels do you see between the accusations against Jason and Jesus? Well, in order to do that, you have to know who Jason is. That's going to be in our readings. Jason is a Christian, and he kind of befriends Paul and kind of shows him around the city and everything like that. What is the Areopagus? Because after we go to the Thessalonica, what we're going to do is go down to these other cities, and we're going to eventually come to the Areopagus, which is down in Athens. So what we're doing is in this visitation Paul has to Europe, he's going to land in Neapolis, which is like you know, the disembarkation place. Then he walks over, I don't know, 10, 15 miles or so to Philippi. Then from Philippi to Thessalonica, then he goes to Berea, and then he gets down here to Athens, and eventually he's going to get to Corinth. And so that's going to be coming in our next program. But here what we're going to do is get to the Athenians. And that's a marvelous expose of that has some application from the 1500s on about the world of science. So what is the Areopagus? What is the significance of Paul's preaching at that site? In what ways did Paul adopt his preaching to the Athenians? In other words, what he's been doing, talking to the Jews all the time, is that Jesus is the Savior. Now he comes to the Greeks, and they don't follow it. If he says Jesus is the Savior, they say, from what? So he has to have a different kind of attack. So How can we present the message of the gospel in ways that speak to the diverse world we live in today? Well, that's the truth. If you don't know the difficulty of that we're facing in our country and our culture. We are doing what Europe did a century ago, that is losing the faith. So they call it knowns, N-O-N-E-S, because anyway, from the age of 20 to 35 or so, people are a large number are called knowns because they don't have anything. They do not have any religious topics in their minds, except for derision, or like, we don't need that, because we have this self-independence that we are in charge. There was a movie many years ago on the Civil War, and they sit down, the family does, because the kids are the children are going to go off to war. The dad, doesn't like it, so he goes off with them. And anyway, they have the prayer of Thanksgiving at Thanksgiving dinner. So I can paraphrase it. You say, no, you can't, because that was like 25 years ago. Yeah, well, that's good, because then you won't remember it either. But here's how the prayer went. We thank you, loving God. Thank you for coming and seeing that I, built this farm, that we farmed it, that we got the riches of this farm, and we took care of the cattle, and we're a people of self-standing nature, and we, are all in this. We're successful people, and so we are to be admired. So please look upon us with your love, because that's who we are. And in a way, what they're saying is, we don't need you. You're not adding anything. We got our yams, and we got our turkey, and we got everything else. So, and that's all from us. So that's what's happening nowadays, is people are just bailing out of any kind of religious experience in some numbers. So anyway, then it says, what images Paul's speech to the Athenians resonate with you? Okay, so let's go to how to read Acts 17. So you'll notice then that in the shortness of these descriptions of both, of Philippi, something happens there. Thessalonica, something happens there. Paul then is on the run. He leaves two of his disciples behind, and he comes into Athens, and then he doesn't stay in Athens long, and then he goes down to Corinth. He's going to stay in Corinth for about a year and a half. So let's start to read here. See, this approach is to kind of give a summary of what we're going to read, and then we're going to read the actual text. So today, Thessaloniki is Greece's second largest city. Paul was on a journey then, which had the usual overview. We know this thoroughly, do we not? Go to the synagogue, talk to the Gentiles, endure suffering and hardship, get beat up, delight and enjoy conversions, and if necessary, prepare for severe opposition. Wow. So that's what's going to happen. Just in other words, if you have your traveler's brochure, it says, what is there to see when you're in Thessaloniki? They say, well, first go to the synagogue, and bring your armor with you, because you're going to get pounded. And then you're going to go out to the Greeks, and they'll have some pita bread for you. And then go down to talk to the Jews again, and be brought before somebody to be put into jail, practically, just like they did in Philippi. So at Thessalonica, port city, Paul heads immediately for the synagogues. Customary left visiting rabbis to preach to the attendees. The men would sit in the middle, the women in the back or along the sides. God-fearers outside, leaning in. So this is all the pattern that we had when we had the first missionary journey. This is the second missionary journey, so it follows the same pattern. Paul's message recapitulates his previous sermons, and the opening gets right to the issue. Jesus is the longed-for Messiah. See, now this is what rankles some of the Jews. Some of the others are saying this is just what we're looking for, but they don't have a definition of Messiah yet. But they're saying this is what we're looking for. Like again, I'll say it, that in the book of Isaiah, it doesn't say Messiah. It doesn't say, a child shall be born to you and he will be the Messiah. It does say something about how he will be Emmanuel, God with us, but it doesn't use that word Messiah. So who suffered and rose from the dead. Now, a man named Jason, here's how we housed Paul and his companions and traditions, has become a covert and later evangelist, is listed in the roster of saints. There is a martyrology that the church has, which lists each day of the saints of the time, especially in the early church, because most of them were put to death. So Jesus is the long form Messiah who suffered, rose from the dead. A man named Jason was there, and he is invited then to Paul. Paul is invited to talk to the participants 3 Sabbaths in a row. So that's the action we're looking for. There was significant acceptance of his message among the Greeks, including spiritually alert women of prominence. That happens several times here now, that women get mentioned as a group. And that is not because of the fact we're trying to say we're gender conscious back then, as much as what they're trying to say is that there are people in our society who have risen to the top along with the men. So it could be that the men, just like up in Philippi, this is a kind of a resting place for former soldiers. Maybe your husband's soldier got killed and you're a widow. And what happens if you are like Lydia and you attain great wealth because of some reason or another? You're very successful in business. So that's what they're talking about, women of prominence. They want to include them. So the Jews became jealous and they marched on the house of Jason, who now would suffer the humiliation delivered to other converts. So he was brought before the magistrates for creating a disturbance, a condemnation also given in Jerusalem about the effect of the Lord Jesus. That's one of our questions. How does Jason imitate Jesus? Well, what did they say about Jesus? He's causing a disturbance. He wants to be a king. He wants to take over our ruling of the country. He wants to stop paying taxes. Those are the things in Luke's gospel that are presented to Caiaphas and Annas when Jesus goes on trial before the Jews. And so what we get here is a similar thing. So it's almost, and well, who wrote the Acts? Luke. Well, who wrote the gospel? Well, Luke. You see the connection? He's using the same words that happened to Jesus now are happening to this poor Jason. So that's important for us because it tells you a certain subconscious continuity. It's almost like Luke can't help but go back to what happened to Jesus is happening to people here, and they are being abused and considered to be outcasts because of the fact that they are preaching that God is with us here in terms of Jesus. And so Paul now had to move quickly and undercover, for the Jews of towns were alert to his message of death and resurrection. So what's happening here is that the people of the town are talking now about there's somebody here who's telling us that our faith is not correct, that we are not, this is in the Jewish community, we are not the people that we are supposed to be. We are supposed to be followers of the Jesus. And especially if there's any Sadducees around there, which there aren't because they're back in Jerusalem. But the Pharisees, they say, they talk about resurrection, about the afterlife. Well, we know that's not true. So anyway, so cohorts prompted Paul and Silas to go during the night. Well, they did that into Berea. Oops, Q got in there. That happens often. Some of the letters in my computer field, they're left out. And so, well, yeah, they want to join the crowd. And look at it, they don't stand alone there. They just sneak up and join, climb onto, another word. This won't be the last of these, because the Jews of Thessalonica weren't satisfied just throwing Paul out of their town. They followed him relentlessly. Isn't this what happened on the first journey? Remember, he goes to Antioch of Pisidia, and he has success there and failure too. Then he goes to the next town, and Iconium. And what happens is the people from Antioch Pisidia, they run down to the next town so they get Paul there. And then the next town he goes to is Lystra. And when they get him there, they beat the daylights out of him and drag his body out the city because he's dead, supposedly. But they beat him so bad that he couldn't be alive, but he was. And they found him in the morning. So anyway, they followed him relentlessly. After having success in Berea, he now had to move fast again, this time off the roads and instead along the seacoast. So that's the way to go over here, because you can, if you have your map of Greece in mind, there's kind of an extension out where Athens is. So what you do is you usually take the boat there, and then you take a boat down to Corinth. And I've already told you how you get on a boat. It's not like they have times and schedules, some of that. You just go to the boat, to the harbor. You ask each of the boats, which one of you going down to Athens? We are. Well, here, there's a couple of us here want to go. Give us some coins, and there you go. So Paul's visit to Athens. Athens is the seat of philosophy in the ancient world, back to its major players in the 300s before Christ. His dialectic with the philosophers reached its apex on the hillside up to the Parthenon. It's called the Areopagus. So what they're saying here about the 300s is this. If you go back in, the development of philosophy actually happened in Greece. It started in the 300s with Socrates. And Socrates, went to his death. Why? Because of the fact he wanted to live with eternal truths. So they usually, when you're sentenced to death for doing some misdemeanors, they say because he was corrupting people by his teaching. So usually they would just say to him, "You're exiled from town." In other words, you got to move, go to live on some island someplace. Just get out of here. And Socrates says, "No, I'll take the penalty, which is death by poison." So why would he do that? Because he believes in his philosophy that there are eternal verities. And once that we get out of this world, in other words, our bodies are bad because they locate us in time and place. Whereas up there, we will be in eternal truth, in eternal goodness, in eternal grace and things. He's not thinking Christian-wise. He's just thinking that that's what his plan is. And so this is kind of a philosophy. So he takes the drink of the hemlock, and as they write about it, his feet turn cold, and his legs turn cold, then his knees turn cold. Are you seeing where we're going with this? His hips are okay. And then all of a sudden, then he dies. And so, so Socrates was the teacher of Plato. And Plato, and you heard the phrase Platonic. Platonic means otherworldly. And so we have the same thing here. If you take the Republic of Plato, and I believe if you go to chapter 6, what you will do is go to the cave. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before in other programs, but the cave is like this. I'll be the people here. So I'm sitting here, and behind me here is a big fire. And there's a kind of a dip, and there's the stage. And on the stage, you see moving things. How do you do that? Well, because the fire is back there, I'm sitting here, and behind me are dancers. So they're dancing back and forth and back and forth. And I'm sitting here, and what do I look at when I see the screen? Shadows. So shadows are going across the screen. So that's what our lives are like. We are shadowy people because we die. And so this mortal body is corrupt. What we need to do is to go into a world of eternal truths. Where did he get that from? From Socrates. So the Platonic kind of thing is less earthly oriented. Then he teaches Aristotle, and Aristotle, by the way, had a job of teaching the great warrior who conquered the world at that time, the son of Philip, Alexander the Great. So, and he was very much a logical person. His whole philosophy, Aristotle, was that we always should aim for the middle, in media res, in the middle of things, the golden divide. In other words, if you have an argument here, you have some kind of a dialectic going on over here, that's too far to the right. And over here, that's too far to the left. What you should be is somewhere in the center. Now, that I'm not going to be political, but I just want to point out that the center of our government has vacated. They went on vacation someplace, maybe Florida, maybe California, who knows? Because we got over here the extreme, and over here the extreme. And so now that I've made my point, the political people will be happy. So what we're dealing with then in these things, I did my graduate studies in philosophy in Georgetown. I was studying theology in the daytime, but my Carmelites wonderfully let me go to Georgetown because they had their graduate programs in the evening, late afternoon. And some schools like DePaul University, they would take themes like metaphysics, ethics, other type of things. Then they would take it through 5 different types of philosophy. But what Georgetown, what they did was they took the philosophers. So he didn't study stuff. So the first person I studied was Socrates, then Plato, then Aristotle, and then you go up to the times of Thomas Aquinas, and then Descartes, and then to other people that were famous there, Kant, Immanuel Kant, and et cetera, all up to the existentialists. That was their program. You say, I'm not interested in hearing about that. So I'll just stop right there. So now his dialectic with the philosophers reached its apex on the hillside up to the Parthenon, the Areopagus. The Areopagus is the hill of Mars. Mars is the god of war. So is Ares for the Greeks. But here you got to remember that we're in a Greek area that's ruled by Romans. So both languages are in use, Greek and Latin. And where the audience was anxious to hear from Paul, and some conversions were made. His speech even had a phrase used in one of our prefaces. In you we live and move and have our being. That's one of our prefaces, before the Eucharist. I relished hearing the reading of this presentation on the spot of the Areopagus years. Oh, this is a personal thing by a youthful religious sister who now is the president of CTU and is now the president. Paul saw inscribed the title to an unknown God. Paul and his supporters know who that is. The unknown God is known to us. So what you get with this visit by Paul is that when you leave the city of Athens, the thing that you look up to all the time is the Parthenon, which is this magnificent building with great big tall pillars. Interesting things about this is the pillars themselves are straight up when you're out in the sea looking at them, but there is an ocular dimension to it. A third of the way up, they put on just an extra layer of stone. When they carve these things, they've put a little bulge in there because that way, when you're out there, and if you had a straight up and down thing, you're going to see something with an indentation. Is that not clever? So what they do is they modify it a little bit. In a later time, much later time, when they invented gunpowder a couple of 100 years ago, they blew it up because they stored their gunpowder there. Well, somebody was smoking a cigar, and he went up in flames, and so did the Parthenon. So they had to kind of rebuild it, and they're doing things. They have models of it now. But when you go there, you really get very much impressed. Now, I think I might have hit something here because I lost Marilyn. Did I hit something here?
Yeah, it's really, looks like it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So I did that just so I could get some more coffee. Coffee's supposed to be very good for you. I didn't. Okay. So let's get to our program here. You can see the fact is we have Paul in Thessalonica, Paul in Berea, Paul in Athens, Paul's speech, and then the dialogue with the Athenians. So that's what we have. And I did print a page of footnotes because it has some material that will help us. So Paul in Thessalonica. Now we get back to reading where we're at. Are we doing okay with time? When they took the road through Amphipolis in Apollonia, they reached Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Following his usual custom, Paul joined them, and for 3 Sabbaths he entered into discussions with them from the scriptures. Do you see how easy this reads to us now? Because we've covered kind of the ideas ahead of time. So it's almost like the text is talking to us, expounding and demonstrating that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. You see, the reason why he's talking about that he had to suffer is because of what I was talking to you before, is the Jews are abhorrent about the fact that the Messiah would come, not dressed in regal robes and all kinds of purple and all that kind of stuff, but crucified, covered with his own blood and pain and anguish. All that is just so down on what a Messiah was supposed to be. So he has to explain that. And there are actually then explanations given in the Jewish texts, are there not? How about Isaiah, our beloved Isaiah? 4 times he has suffering servant songs. Now he calls him suffering servant, and what he means by that is the people of Israel are going to suffer. And he has that chapter 42, chapter 49, and then chapter 51, 52, 53 right in there. We read those four parts of Isaiah during Holy Week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We read the suffering servant songs. They're songs because that's part of a chant perhaps. So, and what they tell us is that the servant, the suffering one, is really going through pain. If you go to Psalm 23, my God, why have you abandoned me? That's verse 1, is it not? What's verse 2? You knew me from the time I was in my mother's womb. I'm not giving you the exact translation now, but I'm just paraphrasing. So in other words, he says, you have been my God all my life. I trust you. Did you know that the Psalm 23 is a dialogue between the hopelessness of crucifixion and the hopefulness of God with us? And when I say crucifixion, you say, well, wait a minute, that was a psalm that was written 1,000 years before Jesus. Yes, but it has so many phrases in it. He says a group of people surround me and they mock me. My tongue is like a dry clay. The dogs bark. All the things that go on with crucifixion are in there, and are and you can identify them with Jesus. And as there are that he was the Savior would be between two thieves and other type things. So you have all kind of stuff that point to the fact of suffering, and the Jewish audience would be listening to this and they would hear that right away. If you read Psalm 23 to them, says, oh, now I see what you're doing is reading back into it, because when they wrote the Psalm, and this is one of David's Psalms, that when they wrote the Psalm back in the year 950, they weren't thinking about Jesus, they were thinking about the people of God. So now what we have to do is to the Catholics, Christians, I should say, whatever, have to take that passage and kind of refract it, because it comes to, we know who now that servant is Jesus the Lord. So when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's because of the fact that in his statement there, he's going to end up with hope, because every other passage is it's like two colors, red and green, red for suffering, green for hope. So you have red and green, red and green, red and green, red and green, all the way down. And finally, at the end, in about verse 20 or so, you end the red, green stuff. And what you do is you just have green. He says, I will worship you in the temple all my days of my life. And so it's a very powerful and noble kind of song that's present there in Isaiah. So I think that's the type of thing that Paul would be using when he gets into these interlocutions with the people who say that our Messiah shouldn't be suffered. Say, well, that's not the way it was expressed by our great hero writers from the past. So some of them were convinced. He says, this is the Messiah, Jesus, whom I proclaim to you. Some of them were convinced and joined Paul and Silas. So to a great number of Greeks who were worshipers, and not a few of the prominent women. See, once again, we get them. This is like people of spirituality, like Lydia, and so they would see this comments about Jesus in a different way. They would believe in it. But the Jews became jealous and recruited some worthless men loitering in the public square, formed a mob, and set the city in turmoil. Oh my God, you think we're in Minneapolis. They marched on the house of Jason, intending to bring them before the people's assembly. When they could not find them, they dragged Jason out of some of the brothers before the city magistrates, shouting, these people have been creating a disturbance all over the world, now come here. Jason has welcomed them. They act in opposition to the decrees of Caesar, claim that there is another King Jesus. Now you see what they do is they shift. I put down there Luke 23, chapter 2. That's exactly what the comment to Pilate's going to be is, well, he's making himself a king. In other words, there's a religious reason for Jesus' death, and there's a political reason for Jesus' death. And so the political reason is he's making himself out to be a king, and that, of course, is dead on the mark, because if word gets back to the ruling emperor at the time, and that they're letting people form themselves as a king and interrupt the politics of the country that we're in, then there's and the guy from Caesarea, Pilate, didn't do anything about it, and he's out. In fact, in the year 36, he is out. And he ended up in Spain, so he must have done something wrong later. But you see what I'm talking about is they cannot say, if Jesus is proposed to them as he's saying he's a king, what do they take that as one of the rebels? Are there other people like Jesus who are doing the same thing, talking about, we're going to rebel against this? Isn't there a group of people that even one of the apostles is this, that they are a kind of staunch opposites of the kingdom that has been imposed on them with all their taxes and stuff like that. And so these zealots are called, so Jesus is the head of them. So anyway, that makes enough sense for us here. So let's go. So they stirred up the crowd, and upon hearing these charges, it took a surety payment from Jason. In other words, a big tip, get by your way out, and the others before releasing them. Now, the brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas to Berea during the night. Okay, so they were in Thessalonica, and before they get caught and beaten, they jump. Now, I put down China after World War II. After World War II in 1948, the country became a socialist communist country, and Catholics, Christians, and other religions were abused and martyred. And I had a friend, he's still alive, who was a priest in Taiwan, but on occasion would go over to China. And the idea would be that you would have a route to go so you could say mass in various places and give blessings in certain places. But they'd wake you up at 2 a.m. and say, you got to get out of here because the troops are looking at buildings and stuff. So you'd have to get out and move. And that's going on today. We thought with a couple of years ago that there was going to be kind of like an entente, an agreement that they're not going to bother the Catholics, but they are. And they're burning churches and they're putting people in prison. And it's an underground church again. So here from 1948, catch this. The Catholic faith has been underground, but has survived as a Catholic faith. They might not have the Eucharist, but they still meet and pray and hold their truths to themselves. But that community, small in number for sure, but it's still there. It's amazing. So anyway, I couldn't resist putting it down. It says, upon arrival, they went to the synagogue of the Jews. Now, these Jews were far more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with all willingness and examined the scriptures daily to determine these things were so. So, I like that because, what I was just talking about, Isaiah, Zechariah, Jeremiah, and all these strands that you have. Some people say there are 300 strands of prophecy about the Jesus. And so some of them might be a little bit shady, but others are right there as to what's going to happen. Consequently, this thing about the Jews now knowing something about who this Messiah might be, they'd be a little bit more fair-minded, saying, "Oh yes, some of the scriptures we read talk about someone who had to suffer." So, and they would accept. However, and many of them became believers, and again, influential Greek women. And so the Jews learned the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul, so they came there to cause a commotion. So the brothers at once sent Paul on his way on the seacoast with Silas and Timothy. See, they don't even get to tell you what happened in Berea. After Paul's escorts take him to Athens, they came away with instructions for Silas and Timothy to join them as soon as possible. Timothy became kind of like the mailman for them. When Paul wrote letters and stuff like that, he would be the one to go throughout the world there to give these letters to various communities. He eventually became the bishop of Ephesus. So he debated in the synagogue. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he grew exasperated at the sight of a city full of idols. That was Athens already. So he debated in the synagogue with the Jews and with worshipers daily in the public square, whoever happened to be there. Even some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers engaged him in discussion. Well, here's two kind of reflections on Greek philosophy. One of them is captured by the book of Ecclesiastes. How it got into the Bible is a big question mark, because it says, in essence, we're going to die. And because we're going to die, nothing is worthwhile doing. How does it start? Verse 1. I memorized verse 1. Okay, you ready for it? Vanity of vanities. Vanity. Vanity of vanities. See how you're not dealing with just some schlunk. 5 times over, the first verse is vanity. And it goes on to display that. But now many people, including famous authors and stuff like that, Thoreau for one, and others, thought this was the greatest book ever written. Because what it does is it talks about how do you live life in a world without God and without an afterlife. And only because of the fact that somebody, I'm convinced it was somebody snuck in with a candle, and one night wrote in something in chapter 3, because there's just a little phrase there where it says, and God planted the desire for infinity on us. See, in other words, we were planted, somebody said, God planted within us a desire for eternity. And so, but all the other stuff is this. It's almost like a Aristotelian moral ethics book. So be kind to people, do stuff for people, help people, don't rob people, don't do this, that, the other thing. That's all fine. He says, but the basic thought comes down to this: eat, drink, and be merry. So when you leave here today, you want to be an ecclesiastic follower. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's one book. Now, another book that we might take a look at to talk about this would be any one of the kind of thoughts from Isaiah on the well-lived life. And so it's how to be happy in a world of pain is basically what the Stoics are saying. Pain comes along, deal with it. I was with a friend yesterday, several of us from the Creeds program down at St. Raphael's, and he is dying. And so we went to be with him. He's very good mood and good feelings about everything, and glad to see some friends come to see him and anoint him, give him communion things. And but that's well, we have a sense that that's not the end of things. So what is this scavenger trying to say? That's a nice way to put it. He sounds like a promoter of foreign deities because he's preaching about Jesus and the resurrection. So that's all we need. He says they took him and led him to the Areopagus and said, maybe learn what this new teaching that you speak of. Now, what happens is when you stand down below, and let's go to the Agora of Athens. I was there for a couple of days before I just started doing my archaeology things. And they had these great big long canopies coming out, and each restaurant would have a certain number of tables. They were all great big long tables. So you probably have 100 people at one table, another, and it's right out in the open, right in the middle of the great big plaza there and stuff like that. You can order, so heroes and stuff like that, or Greek salad. That's the place to get them, as in Greece. And and then what it is you lean back a little bit and you look up, and what do you see way up on the top of the mountain is the Parthenon. And it is of such beauty, and it was a signal to people out in the ocean and stuff like that. I mean, Poseidon would like that, when he comes up for fresh air, he'd like that, take a look, look at what they built up there, and put my statue up there too. So, anyway, as you go up about maybe 60% of the way up, I'm not that accurate, there is this, let's call it a glen, okay, an opening amid all the trees and stuff like that. And they have a stone there. Were you with you want to tell us a little bit about what you saw there?
Well, as you're saying, I mean, and I can talk into
Yes.
the chair. When you come up and you see it, there's a flat stone. I actually went up there. Did you go up there? It's sort of slippery, but
Yes.
there's a stone and I'm afraid of heights, and you look.
Yes.
It's all by itself, and down below is the marketplace,
Yes.
right? And then the other direction is the Parthenon. So it's like in between the world of the gods and the world of people, where they did all their marketplace and everything. And that's where they would come and give these speeches, and they met there for political reasons too. So it's got a lot of history there.
Yeah, that's true. It became almost like a secondary House of Representatives. In other words, when they wanted to make decisions and things like that, then what they did was let me get back over here. What they did was they went up there for the meeting and things like that. And of course, they have all their gods and stuff like that too. So now Paul, what he has to do is to talk to them, but they're not Jews, see? So he's got to talk some Greek to them. So how's he going to do that? What do we have that is in place in our faith and our expressions that would help them to at least be interested in Jesus. Well, that's what happens here. Paul's going to give his speech. So what he's doing is he's adapting his own Jewish thinking to the scientific Greek thinking. So let's start there with verse 17. So he debated in the synagogue with the Jews and had worship for his daily in the public square. The public square would be down below, as Kathy was saying. Even some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers engaged him in discussion. Some said, "What is this scavenger trying to say? He sounds like a promoter for foreign deities." See, they got a God for everything. Remember, we talked about that because he was preaching about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him up and led him to the Areopagus and said, "Maybe learn this new teaching that you speak of." See how they're interested. Why? Because they're philosophers, and philosophers have that trait. They always want to learn. If you're a good philosopher, then you know that you don't know as much as you should. Or you bring some strange notion to our ears. We'd like to know what these things are. Now, all the Athenians, as well as the foreigners reciting there, use this time for nothing else but telling or hearing something new. So then he's going to give his speech. Okay, there. Now let's turn the page. See, they're interested in something new. My goodness. When I was up at Carmel Catholic Mundelein, that was something that we had for our kind of a mantra for our school. We're lifelong learners. And the older teachers, they liked that because it meant that they're still learning a lot. All right, I will put myself in that group. So what courses have I taken recently? Well, I've taken one, and I just am finishing the last part of it on the early church. And from the 20 people that started the church, that's the apostles and a few hangers-on and some women and stuff. And then go 4 centuries into it, and the population of the world was 60 million, and 4 million of them were Catholics. So, that's the progress. That's the stuff I'm studying. Last year I studied the chemistry, development of the world through chemistry, because nobody can answer the question of where did we come from? Because all you can say is, well, there's something out there that we came from, but we don't know what it is. It's like the size of our thumb, and exploded to the cosmos. You say, wow, that's way beyond us. This new telescope they got is going to give us a lot of stuff on that. So anyway, so I took that course. What's my next course? My next course is going to be on the early church. I get these tapes and program learned people. So you Athenians see in every respect you are very religious. For as I walk looking carefully at the shrines, I discovered an altar inscribed to an unknown God. What therefore you unknowingly worship, I proclaim to you. Oh, they like this. You see, this is a cultured person talking to a cultured person. You people are really knowledgeable. He says, and you're very respectful. You like religion. I do too. And here's something, you missed something. You got all God, everything's covered except you're so afraid that you're going to miss something that you got another one here. It's the unknown God. Will cover for you. He says, well, that's the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about Jesus the Lord. He was the one through whom the world was made. Whoa, all of a sudden we shifted. See, so then he says, the God who made the world and all that is in it, the Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in sanctuaries made by human hands. Oh, slap in the face of the Parthenon. None of that stuff, that we build a temple and that's where God is. Come on, give me a break. God is not there. No, it says rather, nor is it served by human hands because he needs anything. Rather, it is he who gives to everyone life and breathe and everything. He made from the whole human race to dwell on the entire surface of the earth. And he fixed the ordered seasons and the boundaries of the regions. This is like going through Genesis, isn't it? Let there be light, and there's light. And marvelously, when the writer of Genesis came to this, he says, I don't want people bothering me saying you're trying to tell us I was there at the beginning. So he messes things up. So he says, let there be light, let there be light. And then later on, let there be the objects that make light. So you see what I'm saying? There was light before there were the things that made light. So, the careful reader would say, oh, what's he telling us is this kind of encapsulated over a period of some days. So anyway, let's continue. So he says, and then he says, rather, it is he who gives to everyone life and breath and everything. He made from the whole human race to dwell on the entire surface of the earth. He fixed the order, seasons, boundaries of reason, so that people might seek God, even perhaps grope for him and find him. Though indeed he is not far from any one of us. Aren't these beautiful lines here? This is very touching. In him we move, we live and move and have our being. I'll get into that later. As even some of your poets have said, for we too are his offspring. I put down there, that's in our Mass lectionary, sacramentary. Since therefore we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divinity is like an image fashioned from gold, silver, or stone by any human art and imagination. How about that? We are the children of God, so shouldn't we be looking like God would look? Well, that's who Jesus is. It says God overlooked the times of ignorance, but now he demands that all people everywhere repent, because he has established a day on which he will judge the world with justice. Though man he has appointed, and he has provided confirmation for all by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the Lord, some began to scoff. Others said, we should like to hear more on this. So Paul left them. But some did join him, became believers. Among them were Dionysius, a member of the court of Areopagus. Now, to my knowledge, he became later a bishop. So he must have converted. A woman named Damaris and others with him. You don't get your name in there unless, it doesn't say Damaris, the stupid one who kept her inane gods. No, she must have been a beautiful woman of great grace. I put down there, Athens and Alexandria were the two cultural leaders of the world of culture, but Rome eventually is going to take over. Now, go to the next page, which are footnotes. And these footnotes deal with the Acropolis. The Council of Athens met there one time, met on the hill. Royal colonies, Paul's appearance, he preaches. So you might read this. It's a commentary on it. But go to the very bottom. In him we live and move and have our being. Some scholars understand this by saying that was based on Epimenides of Knossos, which is an island, the 6th century BC. For we too are his offspring. And here Paul is quoting Aratus of Soli, a 3rd century BC poet from Cilicia. So is Paul well educated or not here? He's calling on some philosopher from 6 centuries before and another one from 3 centuries before. So we've got the fellow here who knows his stuff. So we actually covered all the questions, so you'll get an A+. Then we read the essay. I had twins one time, and I taught for some years before I was principal. So, and I taught senior religion class, among other things. I taught calculus, for example. So anyway, they were twins, and we had semesters for the seniors. So one semester, this twin took it, my class, and the other one took the marriage class. Then the second semester, marriage class came over here, and that first part came over here. So the one brother, he writes a beautiful essay. I'm talking beautiful essay, like 10 pages, very nice stuff. That was in November, like November 3rd. Then comes along March 15th, and his brother is over here. Same course, same essay required. So he turned in the same essay. So I wrote him a note. I should, they're friendly. I said, November 3rd, this paper got an A. I says, March 15th, this gets an F. Of course, he never complained about it because he probably didn't even read it. I just thought I'd mention that. Things teachers face. Well, do you have any questions or observations or thoughts you'd like to share with others? Yes.
How many years after Jesus was crucified did he appear to Paul? Was it 4 or 5 years?
I would think, because we don't have good dates on this. It doesn't say, in the 3rd year or something like that. But I would figure that it would be either, because Jesus died in the year 30 on April 7th. And this would have been like 2 or 3 years after that.
And how would he know that Jesus spoke the 500 people?
Well, he
was only with the apostles for maybe 40 days.
Well, remember, this is what Luke is doing the writing here. So he's the one who's saying that, that this, that he spoke to Paul and Peter and James and the 500 and stuff. So somewhere that must be in people's minds. We don't have that anyplace else. I mean, it's, you know, we'd have to open up one of these books, you know, of these like Raymond Brown or something like that to really get kind of a reflection on it, because he wouldn't let a single thing go by without telling you about it, you know. So you know, so that's what we'd have to do. I'll have to do that. I'll get that book and bring it next time. Yeah, I see. They think that these early events go from the year 30 up to the year maybe 36, but they don't have an accurate records on that. So remember, Paul goes off into the desert too, you know, so he's off for quite a while. And then he comes.
And he doesn't hook up with Luke until 10, 15 years.
Yeah, but maybe Luke doesn't connect somehow with the apostles. He must have, because see, the apostles are the ones who have these experiences, and they could have been very early that he appeared, you know, because he's not going to appear 10 years later to 500. He's going to appear within that time of in between the resurrection and the ascension into heaven. So that, you know, that's when he spoke to people. Pentecost was a gift of the Holy Spirit. So that would have had to have been in that time zone between the Passover and the summertime.
But Luke probably wasn't even born then.
Yeah, could be.
He was several years younger than Paul.
Yeah.
Because he didn't write his Gospels till what year?
Yeah. Yeah. See, they just didn't pay the same attention that we would to dates and months and things like that. So we're in a conundrum. I mean, we kind of have to say, well, what would common sense be? You know, common sense would be, if Luke is mentioning it, it must be in the mindset of the apostles that are feeding him information. Remember, he said he was going to do a heavy study of all these things to give us the truth about these matters. Anybody else have a thought or question? Once more, dear diary, presentation so clear, so understandable, no questions asked.
You've been drinking your coffee.
Yeah. You think it's coffee?
I have a question.
Oh, we do have a question from.
A Zoomer.
Yes, please.
Is it true that Paul might have had the stigmata?
Is it true that Paul might have had a stigmata? The only reference to that is Paul says that he has some kind of a ailment or misanthropism or whatever you want to call it, and he begs to get rid of it, but he can't. Now, some people would say, well, maybe you know, he had some eyesight problem, maybe he had some vocal problem, maybe he had some other type thing, you know, that was a lasting thing. So that would be, somebody would make a conjecture on that, a guess on that, was there, but there's no evidence for it that he would have the stigmata.
Okay.
And it wouldn't seem to be appropriate for him to have the stigmata. He gets beat up enough as it is. It wouldn't, you know, they'd have to search for a place that hadn't been black and blue. So
Okay.
yeah, I think that would be, somebody would say, you know, here's a possibility, but I wouldn't give it any credence myself.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay.
All right, well, thank you. We're going to stop recording, and thank you for everyone who joined us via recording, and we will start our movie in a minute.